It's crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're crossing over with the Locked On Dolphins and Locked On Bengals today. You've got Kyle Krabs at Grinding the Tape from Locked On Dolphins, joining myself, Jake Lisco, and James Rapine from Locked On Bengals. Locked On Crossover Thursday is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is so much fun, so easy to play. My favorite thing about it is just how easy it is. You against the projections, you're going to pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, and you can win up to 10 times money on your entry. It's easy, it's quick, less than 60 seconds to enter. We love Prize Picks. We know you well too. First-time users will receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com and promo code Locked On. Here on the Locked On Podcast Network, we cover your team every day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube. So go check out the Locked On Bengals and Locked On Dolphins podcast on any of those platforms. Hit that subscribe button, hit that follow button, and we appreciate all of you who make us your first listen. And guys, without further ado, let's get in to the biggest stories of this game. There are a lot of storylines we can pick from here, but Kyle, we'll start with you. What stands out the most?
I think one thing that's really interesting for Miami's standpoint in this contest is everybody kind of looked at the first 4 games on the schedule: home against New England, at Baltimore, Buffalo Bills, defending AFC champion Cincinnati Bengals, and you said, wow, this is kind of a killer's row of AFC teams to get your season started. And of course, Miami has surprised with how they have handled this, and this game brings a whole new set of challenges with Cincinnati and the wide receivers and the weapons that they have, where Miami will still be without cornerback Byron Jones, who started the year on PUP. I think Cincinnati is the team that is best positioned to challenge Miami in their secondary without Byron Jones. And then obviously the short week and the defense, who's been the backbone of the team for the last 3 seasons, playing 92 snaps against Buffalo on Sunday in the heat. I think this is a really big test, and I think some people may look at Cincinnati's record and be a little bit dismissive, but I'm certainly not. I understand the matchup problems that they present, and if they can get the protection sorted out and Joe kind of hums against the blitz like he did so well last year, I think it's a really, really good litmus test for Miami in the end of this very strong first quarter of their season schedule to kind of get a feel for, okay, this is going to be a contending team in the AFC playoff landscape, but just how seriously should we be taking them in the early portions of the season as an AFC contender?
3-0 is a good way to start.
Do you buy the trap? The trap game talk, or obviously it's a tough spot. Anytime you have to go on the road Thursday night, that's rough. But are you buying that some, given the injuries, and both teams are dealing with some injuries here, especially DJ Reader on the Bengals side, which we can talk about.
Yeah, it's a tough loss for you guys for sure.
But are you buying that for Miami coming off the win against Buffalo?
I think it's not necessarily a trap for the sense of a lack of respect for Cincinnati, but as a team that has not had, they were 3-0 last in 2018, and I think the time before that was 2013, and then you got to go back to like early 2000s. Like they're not in this position often, and you have a first-year head coach. You still have a young team. They're 3 years into their kind of rebuilt roster, and you've seen them put finishing touches. But I think this is where the importance of veteran players like Melvin Ingram and Tyreek Hill on either side of the ball are going to be really important to kind of keep Miami and their young players grounded. Because I think you can look at, hey, we came back, we put 42 on Baltimore, and then we held off Buffalo at home and knocked off a team that has had a lot of success against us, and you can kind of drink the Kool-Aid and feel yourself a little bit. And I think from that perspective, it's where I think this can be a pretty volatile blend for Miami to have those elements in addition to being the short week. But I'd be very surprised if they looked at Cincinnati and they looked at a 1-2 record and they let that be the letdown component. I think there's some more internal demons that they'll have to make sure that they are fighting and staving off to make sure that their heads are centered for this football game.
Bumps and bruises, getting used to winning, like you're saying, and just the brutality of having a short week off of what transpired, especially on that defensive side of the ball, like you mentioned, in that heat where numerous players for Buffalo on the sunny side of the field down there in Miami showed up on the injury report with just heat listed as their injury. James, from the Bengals perspective, obviously trying to get things back on track here, and so some other fun narratives you could talk about as well if you think any of them stand out. But what stands out to you as the biggest story from the Bengals side of things?
I think the pressure's on the Bengals still. And the moment they went to Dallas and dropped to 0-2, they thought, okay, in 5 days we can get to even. And so they did that first part of it against the Jets in week 3. And so now 4 days later, can they take care of business against a 3-0 team? I don't know if people necessarily thought at the time thinking that they would be 3-0, but the Dolphins are 3-0 and they're scary. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to make a face when you talk about that roster on both sides of the ball. So that's it. Are the defending AFC champs, who a lot of national pundits talked about being or kind of being a fluke last year, and it might be a letdown this year coming off of that Super Bowl loss. Are they really going to start 1-3? Because it's kind of the opposite of what Kyle said. This first part of the schedule, everybody, me, you, everybody seemed like it was like, these are the games you can win. You can get off to a really good start. Maybe you're 3-1 in the first 4. Maybe you're 4-0 in the first 4. And then it starts to get much tougher. Well, instead, the Bengals are 1-2. And so if they go 1-3 during the easy quarter of the season, what are the next 13 games going to be like? So I think that's the storyline here. And you can go into other things, and there's other things I'm sure we'll talk about, but are the defending AFC champs really going to fall to 1-3? Because if so, it would be a huge letdown compared to where expectations were a month ago.
I wonder if we'll be talking in a few days about a Bengals team that is extremely motivated because of that reason. Still backs to the wall a little bit, but a little bit of relief certainly from beating why am I blanking on the team the Bengals just beat? The Jets. Wow. In week 3. And the Dolphins coming off of a bit of an emotional division rivalry win over the Bills. Do you think we'll maybe be I don't know. Kyle, what's your perspective on this? I see that storyline brewing depending on how the game goes.
Yeah, I will say I had a collective sigh of relief when I saw you guys handle the Jets, because the worst thing for me would have been, hey, the Bengals are really backed in a corner if they're 0-3 coming in this game. They caught that last year against Indianapolis. The Dolphins did, where Indianapolis came down and they were 0-3 to start the year. And they got probably the best game that the Colts played in the first half of the season, was the effort that they put forth against Miami, where everybody's making really critical plays and you could feel the urgency from that football team. But I certainly think the AFC landscape and the NFL landscape in general, I think, is a nice way to avoid some of that pressure, where you have 2 teams that are undefeated that are left after 3 weeks. So, you can look at Cincinnati and say, yeah, 1-2, but it's still wide open, right? Like you feel like there's going to be a lot of attrition this year, and it's going to be a very tightly wound race. So it makes those conference games very important, but it's also one of those things where at 2-2, you might be saying, hey, if the season ended today, we'd still be in a playoff spot, just kind of how crowded the field is right now. So I think that there's a lot of ball game left, but I certainly think, the Colts last week knocking off Kansas City as a team, and Miami knocking off Buffalo, some of that urgency for your big picture aspirations. Neither one of these 2 teams with a loss is going to feel like, wow, we feel like all of our aspirations are going to be slipping away, because Miami got off to a 3-0 start, and Cincinnati kind of in the middle of that crowded field, despite kind of a underwhelming start versus the expectations that I know the team had for themselves in Cincinnati.
And some fun matchups to talk about in this game, from the Tua Burrow rematch. Tyreek Hill talking his talk, owing Eli Apple. That's a fun one we can talk about, Kyle, and plenty of matchups we can get in this one.
Yeah, before we dive into matchups, I do want to let everybody know about our friends over at BetOnline. However, betonline.net is your number one source for all of your football betting information this season. You can find all the latest player developments, matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles on every game that you could possibly hope to find. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport. It is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games, including Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet online, where the game starts.
And where does this game start, Kyle? Let's talk about it. Is it Tyreek Hill, Eli Apple, or the Dolphins going to blitz and play a bunch of cover 1 and cover 3? Or what do you think? Where do you want to start here?
Yeah, I'm very much interested in Miami's rush effort and what they did against Buffalo and some of the translatability that I think could be here for Cincinnati. And I know Joe Burrow, going all the way back to LSU, has had a lot of success with the empty protections and spacing the field. And I think that being a world in who can get the other team out of what they want to do is going to be, I think, one of the defining matchups of the game. Is Miami going to stress the offensive line in ways that is going to force the spacing of the field to be reduced in? And I know Cincinnati loves to live in 11 personnel, and they'll probably still remain in 11 personnel, but what do the formations look like? How do they try to accommodate if Miami has success creating miscommunications up front? Because they are a schemed and designed pressure system that looks to isolate matchups and create miscommunication or dictate what way the center turns and drop players out from that side and try to attack the interior gaps that way. Or is Cincinnati going to have the answers when they're hot and force Miami to kind of get out of those pressure looks and be a little bit more vanilla? I think that for me is the really fascinating chess match that we have the chance to see play out in this game.
Yeah, let's stick with that, because to me, and I want to get to the Tyreek Hill, Bengals secondary, Jalen Waddle, all of those things. But when it comes to this offense, and they haven't been as explosive as they've wanted to be in the first 3 weeks, how do you think the Dolphins are going to go about it? Because I've seen a bunch of different things about the Dolphins. Obviously, they pressured and blitzed a decent amount last week with Allen. Do they go a bunch of too high? Do they do that? Do they go that route? How do they take away these receivers, especially early? Because I think the Bengals, again, this week, they're going to want to try to get off to a quick start. That was such a theme last week. And that's certainly going to be a theme again on Thursday.
Yeah, well, I think the coverage shells that Miami showed against Buffalo that really forced Buffalo to stay patient throughout the entire course of the game, and that's the recipe for how you end up playing 90 plays offensively, is just being efficient throughout, being patient. You saw a lot of cover 3, you saw a lot of Tampa 2. And I think for Miami, there's a lot of translatability that I do think exists between living in a world where you can bring the extra rusher, but they have the versatility with the safeties and Brandon Jones and Javon Holland and linebackers Jerome Baker and Duke Riley, who I think is a more important piece for this matchup than the other starter in Elandon Roberts, who's more of a thumper between the tackles. Duke Riley was the guy that was mugged up on the A-gaps and then turning and running out of there to play deep middle in Tampa 2. And their coverage spacing and zone coverage is night and day versus what it was last year when the team won in week 1 and then lost 7 consecutive games. Their zone coverages were a mess. So it's, we can play man coverage, and that's about the only thing we can do effectively. Well, I think you'll see a little bit less man than what Miami would probably prefer because of the absence of Byron Jones. And then in turn, you're still going to have Javon Holland playing in the middle with bail technique on the outside. So they'll play cover 3, and then they'll mix and match with Tampa 2, and they'll use those safeties and that athletic 225-pound linebacker and Duke Riley to tape the deep middle and try and run some Tampa 2 so that they can present some of those too high looks, which I know has been a challenging riddle for the Bengals offense to solve in the first month of the season.
Yeah, it will be interesting to me if we do get that sort of cover 3 bail technique in this game, and if Joe Burrow is willing to just throw it up to T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, probably the one that doesn't draw Xavier Howard, who Joe Burrow has praised this week as a guy that just makes everything hard, and he's a great player. But Nick Needham and T. Higgins, for example, is that a matchup that Joe Burrow is happy to take advantage of if he gets that single high look? Something that we saw him go after Sauce Gardner a few times last week, and to varying degrees of success, right? Should have been touchdown potentially on a 25-ish yard target to the back pylon, and a 50-yard or so, 40-yard or so vertical to T Higgins as well. The other thing that was really interesting to me that I've seen out there as I've looked at this Miami defense a little bit is some of the invert looks and some of the rotations they run to get into some of those too high in Tampa looks are quite interesting, dropping the safety down into that Tampa spot instead of necessarily just sprinting the linebacker back. And so how Joe Burrow deals with some of those rotations will be interesting as well. And, along those same lines, an issue for the Bengals this year has been just the inability to get a running game going with Joe Mixon. And I wonder how much of that is to do with just finding the right spots and getting caught in rotations at times where they look like they're running into a light box and then there's a post-snap rotation to single high and they're coming downhill anyway, or they're quick keying and coming downhill because the Bengals have been a little bit predictable going under center and just running wide zone. And that's gotten a little bit better in previous weeks. I think the Bengals have shown some tendency breakers, but I do think that the chess match will be very interesting because there seems to be a clear formula for slowing down the Bengals, which is play Tampa 2, play cover 2, make Joe Burrow be patient, take away those receiver verticals on the outside and make him find his intermediate, his checkdowns and make them do it the hard way. You talk about Buffalo running 90 plays. The Bengals did it in week 1 against the Steelers, who played an uncharacteristic amount of too high stuff for the Steelers. And I just wonder, looking at what the Dolphins like to do, if that patience will be there, because Joe Burrow, famous for the you can't zero me quote, and those sort of opportunities against the blitz, I think that will be really fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, and then there's the other side of the ball, right? Where, I know James had mentioned Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and the Bengals secondary, and Tua Tagovailoa we're expecting to play in this game. I know he's formally listed as questionable. It looked like he got cleated by one of his offensive linemen. I know it's a back and an ankle for Tua. It looked like he kind of just got stepped on as he was delivering a throw in the second half against Buffalo. So I think that's me solving the riddle, because I'm like, when did that happen in the midst of the game? But you saw when Miami got set up on the short field with the turnover that they got in the first quarter against Buffalo, they tried to go under center and run a QB sneak, and Tua got bent backwards on that. And that was kind of where he said that his back got tweaked initially. And then they had the hit, which everybody was all abuzz about, where he came up off the ground and his legs were kind of jelly. And then he said he really struggled staying loose in the second half just because Buffalo had so much time of possession that he couldn't get loose and stay loose because there was so much time space between their possessions. So I do expect him to play. I think they've been pretty selective with their shots down the field. Against Baltimore, it was kind of like, well, screw it. We're down 21 points. We got to go either way. And the speed kind of took over, but they did a really nice job setting up the big shot to Jalen Waddle that they took, where they ran a bench route on the first big play on that drive to Jalen Waddle, where he pushes inside with his stem and then breaks out to the corner. And then if you watch the route that he actually ran faked the bench and then came back to the post, and they ran too high in that look, and they had Tyreek Hill run a corner on the other side. So these safeties kind of just split wide open. So really nice schemed. I think they have done a nice job in utilizing the speed and either challenging teams to either play both of them on the same side of the line of scrimmage or to put them on opposite ends of the formation and really test, okay, are you going to come out and you're going to play too high and give us all this room to work in the middle of the field? Or are you going to try to bracket, in which case then we could try to run the football or kind of come over the middle to Mike Gesicki or somebody else?
Yeah, I think that the juggling act with two of them, because that's the hard part.
Yeah.
And, Lou Anarumo did a pretty good job last year of scheming up things against Tyreek Hill, but of course, Travis Kelce was there too, but Tyreek Hill, but it's different when you have Tyreek Hill and then you have young Tyreek Hill, who's been great after the catch. Doesn't need to necessarily beat you vertically to kill you. He's what I think second in the league in yards after catch. So I wonder, and Jake, this could be the Dax Hill game where they get a little more speed out there. I wonder if that's the route they go, because you're going to need speed. Chidobe Awuzie said it. To defend it, you got to have it. And so this Bengals secondary is going to be tested. It's a good spot, and we could continue talking about this a little bit before we get to our predictions. Might be a good spot for Jesse Bates to show the league, what he deserves in March in free agency. But first, before we get to our predictions, before we continue this conversation, I got to tell you about Brightco, because the guys at Brightco, well, they're geniuses. When you buy an engagement ring or you buy earrings or any type of valuable, you don't necessarily think about insuring it at that time. But buying insurance for those valuables should be easy. It should be fast. So whether it's a watch, whether it's earrings, whether it's an engagement ring, you can get covered in 2 minutes on your cell phone right now. You're not going to find a better deal on great coverage that's super affordable. So if you're about to buy something for her, if you're about to buy something for yourself, maybe you want a little blinged out, maybe Dolphins fans are about to get a 4-0 blinged out necklace. Well, you can go to bright.co/locked on and get insurance for your jewelry, for your valuables right now. Again, that's bright.co/locked on.
Yeah, let's stay on the matchups just for another minute or two here, because the receiver corner matchups I think are interesting. What the Bengals do in the secondary I think is interesting. What Lou Anarumo is going to do with a very adaptable, very amorphous defense on the back end. They do what the game plan calls for. We've seen them go blitz heavy at times. We've seen them drop 8 for an entire half and somehow stifle Patrick Mahomes in doing so. So the plan that's cooked up here for Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, and Tua will be interesting. But the other matchup that I think really bears talking about here is Trey Hendrickson and Terron Armstead, who certainly going to play at left tackle, much the same that La'el Collins is probably going to play at right tackle. And, you know, these were contracts, a fantastic contract for Terron Armstead. I thought the Bengals got a steal with La'el Collins at his much lower number. Armstead has played significantly better. Hendrickson coming off of his probably career best game with 3 sacks and 3 forced fumbles last week. That should be a really fun strength on strength matchup. But of course, the Bengals also have to overcome losing DJ Reader in a spot where he potentially could have taken advantage of Liam Eichenberg and Connor Williams losing a new position. And on the other side, the Bengals don't really have that dynamic pass rusher to maybe take advantage of a potentially advantageous matchup with Greg Little over there. But what's your feel for the trenches for this team? Is there something that the Bengals can exploit there?
Yeah, it kind of calls or echoes what happened last week where Buffalo was without Ed Oliver and they had Von Miller, and they have a lot of young players who are their other edge players, whether it's Gregory Rousseau, who's been off to a nice start, or Boogie Basham, or any of the other options that they have rotationally. But it was like Von's the guy, right? Yeah. And, you know, in crunch time, Von's on the left side of the defensive formation and he's rushing against Greg Little. But in the matchups where Miami had him matched to the same side as Terron Armstead, you kind of saw all of the trust that they put in Terron to say, okay, we're going to leave this as a one-on-one matchup. We trust that you can win it with consistency, and we're going to occupy the other guys and make sure that Liam Eichenberg has help, because I do think he is the weak link right now on the offensive line. Greg Little has performed admirably, but you can tell he's a swing tackle, right? You know, he's ideally not one of your starting 5, and Austin Jackson went on injured reserve after playing 15 games or 15 snaps against the Patriots in week 1. So you know you're going to be without him for a little bit, and you're hoping to keep your head above water there. So I think Robert Hunt at right guard has played phenomenally. I think he's developing into a high caliber starting guard. And Connor Williams, his athleticism has really shined up front. So I think Connor being able to help Liam and Rob being able to help Greg, as long as everything at left tackle performs the way that the Dolphins expect it to, I think that's how you'll see that play out, where they will be willing to leave Trey Hendrickson and Terron Armstead matched up in one-on-ones because they had success with it last week against Von. And I do know that Trey has different ways that he can challenge you. I think he's a little bit more of a dense player. I think he has some more power elements, where Von is a lot of speed and a lot of flexibility and kind of that blink and you'll miss him type player. And that's not to say that Trey Hendrickson's not a speedy threat off the edge either, but I do think it'll be an interesting kind of change of pace for the ways in which Terron Armstead is going to have to handle his pass sets to make sure he's where he needs to be.
Those guys know each other well from their time together in New Orleans, of course. And it'll be interesting. There's a fun strength on strength matchup there, and some fun, you know, you talk about the Miami fronts dictating protection for the Bengals. Can the Bengals do the same thing to try to isolate some of these guys on the Dolphins side of the ball? And that's the way football goes. Both sides are trying to find those matchups, right? And playing that chess game. And there's a ton here we could talk about. We could talk about the success Raheem Mostert could have with the speed that he brings. We could talk about, you know, whether you are a Tua believer, but we got to get to predictions here, guys. How are you feeling about this one? The 3-0 Dolphins go on the road and find themselves as relatively heavy underdogs, all things considered, with, as far as I know, quite a lot of the money coming to the Bengals side in Vegas. How are you feeling about this right now, Kyle?
Yeah, when we sat down and we did the season prediction at the start of the year, I had this as an L. I had the Dolphins at 3-2 through the first 5 games of the season. I think for a lot of the dynamics that we've talked about, Miami being on the road on a short week, off the emotional consecutive emotional wins against Baltimore and Buffalo, the fatigue that's involved in that, I believe they've only done walkthroughs this week with practice, and that, quite frankly, might not be a bad thing with how the game went on Sunday. But at the same time, the hurricane prompted them to leave earlier than they planned to make sure that they would get out on time and their game day routine would be the same. Like, there's a lot of stuff that is flying in your face right now from an adversity standpoint. So if I lean into what I thought before the season and I look at the situation and how it's played out, I think the pathway for winning this game for Cincinnati it's there, and it's there for the taking, because you will have all of those game day elements in your advantage, and you are the team that, quite frankly, needs the win more, right? Because you're sitting at 1-2. You don't want to go to 1-3. Miami at 3-0. You have to fight that, all those things we talked about. But I do run a Dolphins podcast, and the Dolphins are 3-0. So I got to run on the heater here, right? Like, I got to lean into it a little bit. I'm going to pick the Dolphins to win the game. I'm going to go like 24-22 or something like that. But like, I just wanted to be completely objective and say, look, I see everything we're talking about. And before the year started, I picked Cincinnati to win this game. Would not be surprised if it happened, but I got to ride with them now at this point. So I'm going 24-22 and lean into the team of destiny type feel that's going on right now.
That was the longest but I've ever. It was 3 minutes of, I see this, and that. No, I get it. I understand. And this has been a tough one for me. And I think they all are, after the team that you podcast about loses to Mitch Trubisky and Cooper Rush. I think it makes it much more difficult to be confident going into a game. Last I checked, the Bet Online odds were, was it 4.5, 5? I mean, it was really high. So I would take the points all day. But I think you hit on it. And just talking to players last week, talking to coaches last week, and you have to do this with Thursday games in general. You have to view them essentially as together. Like, we just have this cluster and we just have to get through it to the mini bye. The Bengals were talking that way. Not that they were overlooking the Jets. Obviously, they played well. They played their best game of the year. But I think they know to kind of complete their goal of the past 2 weeks. They're going to come out. They're going to have to be the more desperate team. The pressure's on them. And I think they make one more play, but it's going to be close. It's going to come down to the wire. I think it could go the other way. I'll take the Bengals 30-27, but you could flip it. You know, if you told me that the Dolphins won by a field goal or the Dolphins won by a touchdown, it wouldn't shock me at all. And so it should be a fun one. I'm excited to watch it in person.
For sure.
But the emotional element of it for the Dolphins, combined with the desperation of the Bengals on a short week and the fact that they're at home on Thursday Night Football, I'll take the Bengals in a tight one.
These are teams that have had games come down to the wire multiple times this year. The last 2 weeks for the Dolphins, as we've discussed, with Buffalo running out of time, with the last second touchdown against the Ravens, the Bengals losing their first 2 games. And I'll say this for the benefit of your listeners, Kyle, the first team, I believe, ever to lose their first 2 games on a last play of the game play. They lost their first 2 games on kicks as time expired, in overtime and in regulation, in consecutive weeks. That's never happened. And so you look at these teams, you see 3-0, you see 1-2, you might think, well, why the heck are the Bengals so heavily favored? And, you know, there's AFC champion stuff playing into that as well. There's the Dolphins going on the road. But the reality is the NFL is just such a tight league right now. These games are all, for the most part, really close when you get out of the dregs of the league in particular, and you get to that middle class, which I think might be where both of these teams are. And maybe Miami fans come after me for that because they're 3-0 right now and just beat two really good teams. But
at Jake Lisco, crush it.
Yeah, it's right there. On the
get them, Dolphins fans.
Come at me. It's fine. I won't see your tweets. It's the teams are close is what I'm saying, which is why, you guys are talking about these razor thin margins where it could come down to the last play. But the other thing I just wanted to add to that is Thursday Night Football is weird, man. On paper, this has the makings of a shootout, which is how James is coming to 30-27. Kyle a little bit more conservative with the 24-22, but weird stuff happens on Thursday Night Football on these short weeks where teams don't get to do the kind of preparation they're used to and things are disrupted. And it's going to be weird to see what the weird is this week. And that's kind of my closing thoughts on this game.
Yeah. This has been great, guys.
The other weird part was the fact that Miami practiced and went through their walkthrough at the University of Cincinnati on Wednesday. Yeah. So just odd, right? That probably wasn't, maybe that wasn't the plan. Not sure. Maybe that was.
Yeah. And like weirdly, like I've never been to Nippert, but I've saw photos of like, it's just kind of like public access. You walk, like it's see in the down middle from of campus. The street.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You can see it.
And obviously we have the tape gate from whoever's observing from the field. And somebody had posted a couple of clips of walkthrough stuff. And I don't know, maybe Mike McDaniel's really playing 4D chess. Maybe. Who knows, right?
If anyone would, it's him, right? The galaxy brain is in Mike McDaniel's head.
Right. I would be inclined to say, well, our game before preparations got thrown off by expedited travel. So let's get the first place that we feel comfortable to go do a walkthrough. And some of the logistics may or may not have slipped through the cracks, but they got saw like 5 or 6 plays though. So unless they got like a camcorder up there and they hit the whole thing, like hopefully we only have to throw a couple of third and mids away or something like that off the game sheet.
Yeah.
Real quick, how has he been situationally through 3 weeks?
Pretty good. Aggressive, I think would be one way to describe it. They went for 4th and 7 against the Patriots at the 40-yard line with 20 seconds left in the first half, and they scored a touchdown on that play and they took a timeout to come in there and talk through that one. The challenges have kind of been, I don't want to say frivolous, but like aggressive. If we think this one might bounce our way and we think it's a big play, and that happened against Buffalo early in the game last week, we'll throw it. But I would expect a aggressive script. There's not a lot about Mike McDaniel and his approach to a game that dictates that we're going to do anything close to the vest.
I'm excited to see this one. I'm excited for one reason. It's a great matchup. And another reason, I think there are things in the Mike McDaniel offense that I would love to see the Bengals steal. And so we're going to get a chance to see some of that firsthand. This has been Crossover Thursday on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thursday Night Football coming up. And for your post-game coverage, make sure you check out more on Locked On Bengals and Locked On Dolphins, where we have you covered every day, even after Thursday Night Football.